Welcome into College Basketball Recruiting Weekly. I'm your host, 24/7 Sports Director Scouting Adam Finkelstein, and it is a big week in the basketball world. It's NBA Draft Week, which is one of my favorite times of year, but it is also in between the two Scholastic Live periods for college basketball recruiting. Of course, we've got breaking news out of West Virginia as well, and we are going to cover all of it. NBA draft this year and next year. What's next at West Virginia, and what did we see on the recruiting trail this past weekend? We've been waiting a long time for the 2023 NBA draft because Victor Wembanyama, he is finally here in the United States, and we are ready to see him with the San Antonio Spurs. But he's not the only high-profile rookie who will be joining the NBA next year. We're going to break them all down and also look into who could be some second-round steals, given some late value Andrew Nembhard style. All right, guys, we're recording this on a Tuesday night. It'll be out Wednesday. A day later, the NBA draft will come out. We will know exactly where Scoot Henderson, Brandon Miller are going. But regardless of the destination, I want to talk about who do you think will be the better NBA player, both as a rookie and long-term. Bossi, I'll start with you.
I'm going to go with Scoot on this one. I feel like the experience he gained playing in the G League these last couple of years is really, really helpful. And the number one thing that stands out to me with Scoot is everything I hear about him suggests that he absolutely loves the game of basketball and is obsessed with getting better. And I think that's going to be a really key point working in his favor, is how badly he wants to be there and how he wants to stay there for a long, long time.
All right, now, Trav, I want to dig into that with you because you and I talked about Scoot on this show a few weeks ago. And you recalled how when he was in high school, how he was almost bored at times, how the motor was inconsistent. You said you had been satisfied by the motor from what you saw in the G League. I'm going to speak for myself. I think the motor's been inconsistent in the G League, especially on the defensive end of the floor. Those are my words, not yours. So my question to you is, do you have any concern about this guy who is being portrayed as having an elite motor? Do you buy into that elite motor with what you've seen over the years?
I don't necessarily I wouldn't classify it as an elite motor by any means. As you said, it's still definitely spotty at times. But when he's running and rolling, I mean, he is a special talent. And when you compare him to the rest of the NBA and the rest of the world even, there's very few guys with his amount of talent at the point guard position. I mean, he's an absolute blur in the open court. He's explosive getting downhill, impossible to contain. And when you kind of compare it or match that up with NBA spacing, he can be an absolute menace with the ball in his hands. This jumper, along with the motor, is something to keep monitoring. But when you look at the amount of talent in this kid, to me, he is a no-brainer number 2 pick.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I think his instincts, like when he's playing at full speed, his ability to kind of improv and just make plays on sheer instinct, really impressive. He sees the floor and passes really well in a G League Ignite program that didn't always have great spacing. But to me, I still think he's more of a big game player, like a when the lights go on kind of guy, than he is an elite competitor on a daily basis, because there are just too many moments where he just didn't do it defensively. Trav, I'll give you a chance to answer that same question. Long term or right away, you like Brandon or you like Scoot?
Long term, I'm taking Scoot. But in the short term, I could see this going either way next year, depending on who goes to the Charlotte Hornets. Now, if Brandon Miller goes to the Hornets, I would envision, honestly, Scoot going to number 3, the Portland Trail Blazers. I think that's a perfect fit for him. But if he goes number 2 and you pair Scoot alongside LaMelo Ball, there's only one basketball, and that's 2 ball-dominant guards. How Scoot could fit alongside him while Brandon Miller's getting a lot of touches out in Portland. You could see Brandon Miller have the better rookie season, but long-term, I'm absolutely taking Scoot Henderson.
All right, so a few weeks ago, I'd say 60-40 Brandon Miller. In the week since, the gap is closed, quite honestly. I mean, I've said this on a couple of different outlets. I think Brandon Miller's inability to finish at the rim is very concerning. I think some of what we're hearing from the interviews, quite frankly, is concerning. There were already some, obviously the off-the-court issues this year gave people some pause. I haven't heard that he's interviewed off the charts, quite frankly. So this to me is a pick'em, but in my mock, right before 48 hours before the draft, I did switch Scoot to go number 2. I don't love the fit, like Travis said. What I would love is if LaMelo was moved prior to the draft. I'm not sure that that's realistic, but I think if they could move him ahead of time and get back some assets, that might be the best long-term course for Charlotte. But we will see. All right, on to two other polarizing guys in this draft, and that is the Thompson Twins. Now, had a different development route playing in Overtime Elite the last 2 years. Interesting to note, too, that they haven't even necessarily played in the grassroots circuit to the same extent that these players have. So, Bossi, I'll start with you. Do you have any concerns about their development path or to this point, or what it could mean for their transition to the NBA?
I certainly think it's fair to have questions about them. And frankly, I'm surprised that they haven't come up a little bit more in some of the national media. Now they have with some of the NBA guys I've talked about. Long term, I'm a big believer in Amen and Asar. They're just too freaky, and they're too good at kids and hard workers. I think they're really bright. They're going to figure it out. But let's look at it this way. Brandon Miller, any of these other college freshmen, they were playing Kentucky last year. They're playing Houston. They're playing games that matter with a lot on the line. The Thompson Twins are playing Hillcrest Prep, Word of God Academy. They're playing primarily against players who are younger than them and behind them. And it's not like they're putting up insane stats, and there's really not a lot that they're playing for. And I think that learning how to compete and being ready to compete is a really, really key part of this. Now, maybe they're just special guys who are going to be able to turn it on at that level, but I do think there is some concern about teaching them how to compete and to get used to playing against guys who can match them physically.
Well, and more than that is having to play in the half court. I mean, if you watched their Overtime Elite games that last year, those were transition fests. It was almost like watching Chino Hills with Lonzo Ball back in the day. I mean, it was open floor. Their athleticism dictated the pace. And when the game is played in transition, the questionable shooting isn't as big of an issue as it's going to be in a half-court NBA game. Trav, what do you think about the Thompson Twins?
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to add to what Bossi was saying, especially when you look at the stats they were putting up. Yeah, they're pretty good numbers. But as you said, Adam, this is an open court game. Yeah. When you look across the board of that Overtime Elite League, a lot of these numbers are inflated, and that's just due to the up-tempo open court style that they play in, and not so much half court oriented. You're not seeing the shot clocks winding down. And so I think that's definitely caused some question marks with the Thompson Twins. They are absolutely electric and explosive and must-see TV when they're getting out in transition. But at the NBA level, it's going to be a half-court game, and NBA defenses are really going to try to manipulate and expose their lack of shooting ability.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Also important to note that Asar showed a little bit more progression with his jumper down the stretch of the OTE season, but ultimately that was a pretty small sample size with a lot more space and time than he's going to have at the NBA level. Last question on the NBA draft. Any second-round picks? Now, I mentioned Andrew Nembhard in the opener, someone who Indiana took very early. I think it was the first pick of the second round last year. Ended up starting some games and being a terrific value add. In the middle of the NBA Finals, we saw the Denver Nuggets make a unique move and trade while they were competing for, and ultimately winning an NBA championship, trade for an extra second-round pick, seemingly looking to add another Christian Brown type guy, someone who could come in on a low salary and fight for a spot in the rotation. Is there anyone you guys like who could slip into the second round who you think could be a sleeper? Bossi, start with you.
I'm going with Muhammad Gay from Washington State. There's just so much I like about him that I think translates to the highest level. He's pushing 6'11". He's got length. He's an elastic athlete. He's got some potential as a shooter. I think he's, a new age 5 guy. I think worst case scenario, you just get him running up and down the floor, and he can maybe turn into a Mitchell Robinson type for you. But I think he's Mitchell Robinson with more skill, and that's a guy who could end up being a pretty good player.
Yeah, if he's got the width and the muscle to play the 5, I can see long-term what you're saying there. Trav, who do you like?
I really like Marcus Sasser here.
Yeah.
Talking about a guard who's extremely skilled. He can get his own buckets, but can also pass and create for other people. He's tough. He's heady. Has a high floor. I think this is a guy that can make a roster and contribute to a team next season. And one question that I had with him exiting college basketball, playing with Houston, was just the lack of competitiveness, I guess, he showed in the NCAA tournament. Just the Houston team just looked like they ran out of gas. Him being obviously a leader of that team, you wanted a little bit more out of him. But you look at his body of work and what he did at the G League Elite Combine, he is a tremendous player. May not have as high upside, but definitely somebody that I could see being a steal come draft night.
Yeah, especially in a draft that is lacking point guard depth. My potential second-round sleeper is Missouri's Kobe Brown. Took a notable stride forward this year in terms of his ability to shoot the basketball. And if he can sustain those numbers and prove to be a spot-up floor spacer on the offensive end of the floor, his power and his intensity, everybody says he is an elite character young man. Talk about someone who can come in and plug a lot of different holes because he can play and defend multiple positions. He's a pretty good passer, take the ball off the glass and start the break. But ultimately, I like his NBA-ready body. I like the ability to be somewhat switchable defensively. And if he can prove to continue to make open spot-up threes, I think he's a potential second-round pick who could crack not only an NBA roster, but maybe even an NBA rotation. All right, for lots more on the NBA draft, you can visit 247sports.com. Of course, we got tons of video coverage, the 24/7 Sports channel, and the CBS Sports HQ channel as well. All right, now if you followed our NBA draft coverage this year, you know that we approached it from a couple of different perspectives. I started the year by interviewing NBA executives anonymously who gave me some perspective about when they start to really rank prospects. Typically, it's not until after the first of the year, if that early on. But we know a lot of the fans, they like to see these lists as early as possible. And so Travis has a big board dropping immediately after the draft is over. The first big board includes 10 prospects, and the order is Ron Holland, Tyrese Proctor, Justin Edwards, Isaiah Collier, Cody Williams, Omaha Bilal, Aaron Bradshaw, Modest Buzelis, Jacoby Walter, and Kyle Filipowski. So, gentlemen, I bring you back in here to say, I like this list. Trav, I mean, the number one overall pick, let's just say it's not going to be Victor Wembanyama next year. I mean, there is, suffice it to say, very little anticipation for the 2024 NBA draft. So, I mean, how do we go about reconciling who's going to be at the top of this list a year from now?
It's going to be extremely fluid throughout the entire year. Ron Holland, he is exiting high school as our number one prospect, and he is one that earned that spot just because he's easily projectable. Talking about a 6'8" forward. He's got size. He's a tremendous athlete, and he always plays with a high motor. That's something that has been a staple of his throughout his entire high school career. He hasn't ever been the most skilled guy, but every single time he is running and jumping and defending and rebounding and finishing high above the rim. Now he has developed his skill set on offense. He's now able to attack guys off closeouts and straight line drives. He's also improved his jump shot from beyond the stripe. However, that's an area he's going to still need to keep growing in, but his mechanics are projectable, and that's something that we anticipate him continuing to improve in. So as of right now, when you're looking at high floor and still having some upside to tap into, I'm taking Ron Holland at number one entering the season. But could be a lot of guys like we saw Brandon Miller really make a big jump this past year, and we could see that happen with another guy or a guy returning to college like a Tyrese Proctor, who's currently at number 2 on the board.
Yeah, I think we're basically all on the same page here. Is many of these players have yet to separate themselves. We're all intrigued by different players. Bossi, is there anyone in there who you are particularly interested in following or you think might pop? I don't want to say to the extent Brandon Miller did, because that was really significant, but anyone who's really got your eye going into the next college season?
Absolutely. The guy for me is and has been for quite some time now, Cody Williams out of the Phoenix area, who's headed to Colorado. Maybe this is a little bit of recency bias with seeing how his brother Jalen has developed during his first year at Oklahoma City, and knowing that at the same age as Cody is bigger and further along in his development than Jalen was. But there's just so much I like about him that I think translates to an NBA level. He's a big wing who can really handle the ball. I think he's going to prove to be a pretty good shooter. The only thing he's really lacking right now is strength, and he can maybe be a little bit more of a killer mentality guy at times. But in terms of things that translate to the highest level, he's the guy that really jumps out at me, that if he gets a little confidence and gets rolling, I think we could see him shoot up right to the top of the draft.
Yeah, so Cody Williams, I got to see live again last week in Colorado Springs, USA Basketball 19 and under trials. He went on to make the team. The player, believe it or not, who was the best player there, in my opinion, it was Omaha Bilal. Bossi, did I pronounce that right?
Blue.
The player who was the best one there was Omaha Ballou. And to be candid, he was not in the top 7 when we finished rankings, but the offensive jump he made was glaring in that setting. I mean, he wasn't just making spot-up threes, he was making tough shots. Now, he was always a player who was willing to take those shots in high school, particularly in the EYBL. They just didn't go in on a very consistent basis. So he was known much more for his defensive versatility and his motor. Those things still exist, but if the offense I saw in Colorado last week, if that carries over to the college level, that's going to mean a lot for his NBA draft stock. And so I think Travis is ahead of the curve by having him on this list. It's going to be interesting to follow his progress and Williams' progress with this USA basketball team in the coming weeks as well. You can bet NBA scouts will be locked into that. All right. For one more look at Travis's top 10, many of whom will be in my top tier in the opening entry of the Draftables. You can check out that screen behind you, and you know where to find all this stuff, 247sports.com. It is never too early to start talking NBA draft. Bob Huggins, a Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Famer, his career at West Virginia came to a sad conclusion last week after what had been an offseason of controversy, capped by the DUI in the state of Pennsylvania. Now, the question becomes, what happens at West Virginia, where the Mountaineers had one of the best incoming transfer classes in all of college basketball? All right, guys, obviously it has not been the storybook ending for Bob Huggins and West Virginia. Complicated man for sure. He's always been good to me over the years, but certainly plenty of controversy surrounding his last few months in the job. I think moving forward, we should turn our attention to the student athletes that are still at West Virginia and what comes next for them and their program. Travis, tell us a little bit about who West Virginia was able to pull out of the portal and just how good this class was.
Yeah, they came out with the #1 transfer portal class in the entire country. Went out and landed a top 5 transfer in Jesse Edwards, a college basketball star, and Kirk Reese, an absolute bucket getter in Raekwon Battle, and a handful of others. So this was an extremely talented class. They projected as a top 10 team coming into the season next year. Now, obviously, things can change on a dime for this class and this entire program. One thing that I'm extremely interested in, and this is going to be a big learning moment for a lot of us in this new NIL era. What happens to all these kids who are going in expecting to get a large amount of money out of these collectives? Are these deals binding? Will they be able to stay and keep whatever, I guess, was promised to them in a way? Or are they able to get out and go find a new home elsewhere, despite the fact that very, very few places have spots available? Everybody else has gone and filled up their portal classes. So there's still so much to happen, and this is an extremely fluid situation.
Yeah, and there's a couple of different considerations there. There's the NIL considerations, and then there's the eligibility considerations if the NCAA holds true to this only one-time waiver. So, Bossi, I'm going to go to you on that because I know we've all been hearing a variety of different things. I think certainly right now it's fair to say there is uncertainty surrounding who may or may not be immediately eligible coming out of West Virginia.
Right. As with anything in these kinds of situations, it seems like it's clear as mud, right? One thing is with the NIL stuff, as far as my understanding from speaking to several coaches about this, they can't hold those guys because of any NIL agreements and stuff like that. Because they're going to do that. That's a straight up admission of pay for play, telling someone, well, you can't leave because we promised you this much NIL. So I don't think they would want to be going down that road of you've got to stay here because we promised you X amount of NIL. Now, where it gets tricky is presumably all these guys have now accepted some type of aid and been on campus, taking classes, going to practice, getting housing, getting fed, stuff like that. So that kicks them in that their transfer as official has gone through. So now if they're going to want to transfer, they're going to have to transfer again. They get a 30-day window to enter the portal if they choose. But speaking with several different coaches, there seems to be a lot of disagreement on whether or not they could be immediately eligible or not. Like a guy like Jesse Edwards, who I believe is a grad transfer, could he go right away? Would this be considered Kirk Reese's second transfer now? The one to West Virginia being his freebie, and now he needs to sit out. You've got Jose Perez, who's on the team there, just went through this last year when he left his previous stop because of a coaching change and things like that. So it's all very, very hard to wrap around. And it seems like talking to coaches that no one seems to know for sure what's going to happen. And Travis brings up a great point too, in that most places are pretty full up now. Places that have collectives and things like that, most of their collective dollars are spoken for. So with some of the numbers we've heard thrown around that these guys are potentially getting, it's going to be hard for them to find something similar. So I would think, because of NIL, not because they're obligated to stick for it, but because it's going to be probably hard to find other places that can do much for them, I think they're going to have a good chance of keeping some of these guys, if not all of them, around, provided they get the right guy in there that they can turn to and believe in as a leader.
Well, let me throw this one out there, and let me preface this by saying this is not me reporting anything. This is just an observation on my part. You know, a team that's not full and that could use some reinforcements? Kentucky, quite frankly. And that was my first thought when this change happened, is talk about a team that is, really taking some kids out of the high school ranks that they weren't previously recruiting to try and fill out their roster. They could use some reinforcements, especially given Aaron Bradshaw's injury. And Travis, I'll go to you on this because I know you have typically more information on Kentucky than I would. But if there's a team in the country that could benefit from another surge of players going into the portal, I don't know of anyone who could benefit more than John Calipari in Kentucky at this point. Am I far off on that?
I mean, you're spot on. This team is in desperate need of experience and age. 8 freshmen incoming right now. You don't know the future of Antonio Reeves, who it's clear he wants out. He wants to transfer, whether he can or can't. That is the question that we are awaiting an answer for. So yes, Kentucky is in desperate need right now for age, experience, and players who can come in and contribute right away. This freshman class that we have spoken time and time again, it's not as good as classes, especially in recent history as a whole, just the 2023 class. So some of these freshmen that are incoming, they're going to need a little time to shake off some of the bad habits that they developed in high school. So bringing in some age and some guys with history of success in the college ranks will kind of allow them a little bit of a grace period to kind of find their footing and who they are as players at the collegiate level to impact winning at the end of the day.
Yeah, especially in the NIL era where college basketball is, I think, significantly older, at least at the highest levels, than it was 5 or so years ago. All right, obviously a lot of moving parts in this situation at West Virginia. We will continue to keep you updated, both on the 24/7 Sports channel and 247sports.com. You can get one last look at the West Virginia transfer class to date right there behind you. We've talked NBA draft, we've talked college basketball, and we always have to talk college basketball recruiting because last week was the first week of the Scholastic Live period where players played with their high school teams. You're watching Philly Live. I was there in person while Travis Branham was in the state of Georgia. All right, Trav, I was in Philly this weekend. Your guy, Billy Richmond, he was balling. I got to give credit where credit is due. They put the ball in his hands. He said, thank you. I'm going to take it. I'm going to make plays. I'm going to be an elite competitor. I'm going to show my passing instinct. I'm going to show you why I may still be underrated. My bad, Billy. Where were you this weekend?
I was in Atlanta, Georgia, for the GHSA Southeast Regional. It's an absolute mouthful, but I have to go down to Atlanta every single year. It's a hotbed for recruits, and didn't just have the top players in Atlanta, but also had the surrounding states, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, and even some Alabama teams.
All right. Who was now I think you were going to talk about someone that I was impressed by a week earlier, but who stood out to you in Atlanta this weekend?
2 NBA legacies jumped out to me. First off, Jacob Wilkins, a guy that several on our team have been singing his praises, and I finally got my chance to watch him. And I see it. I get it. I understand. 6'7" forward, extremely long arms, son of Dominique Wilkins, and he's still extremely physically immature and thin. Yeah. So as there's a potential that he could grow another inch or two, but on top of that, his frame is going to continue to fill out. He's going to get stronger, and with that, he's going to get more explosive. So he's already a functional athlete, and he shows flashes of skill with his shot making, and also something I really noticed was he's in a bit of an, I don't know if he's his reputation is, I guess, across the nation, but seemed to be a really good passer. And that's something I spoke with him about afterwards. And he said that's probably his most underrated skill set, and arguably his biggest skill is just being able to pass the ball. Also plays with an edge. He was talking a lot of smack out on the court going against a fellow 5-star 2025 prospect in A.J. White, and Jacob Wilkins, just an absolute exciting prospect in the 2025 class. And then another NBA legacy that jumped out to me was Brandon Bass Jr., obviously the son of Brandon Bass, who was a star at LSU, had a long, more than a decade spent in the NBA. And he's very different than his father. Brandon is actually more of a shooting guard / wing, stands 6'3", 6'4", very skilled scorer. He's polished. He's a southpaw. He makes shots both off the catch and pull. Very good in the open court. He gets downhill, finishes at the rim, both in traffic and through contact. If he grows another 2 inches, man, this kid could be a top 25 prospect. And he did tell me on the recruiting front, his dream school, come to no surprise, is Duke.
Okay, so I did see Wilkins a week earlier in St. Louis, and I couldn't agree more. Like, physically, he's still just a baby. I mean, he hasn't grown into his body at all. Now, the athletic bloodlines, shall we say, they were on full display in St. Louis. I mean, there was one play where he literally dunked all over this kid to the extent that he himself couldn't help but laugh. And it wasn't in like an antagonistic way, like, you know, it was like, wow, I can't believe I just did that kind of thing. There was another play where he had a loose ball. He caught it in one motion, kind of went perpendicular to the ground, or parallel to the ground, I should say, in one motion, flipped it behind his back. So that kind of quick twitch athleticism for the son of Dominique Wilkins was readily apparent in each of the last 2 weeks. Certainly going to be someone to watch. Again, you know where to find all this stuff, 247sports.com. We've got you covered with recaps, and we are back on the road this weekend for the second of the Scholastic Live weekends in the month of June. All right, everybody, as always, thank you so much for watching. And until next week, I can't emphasize this enough. There is a ton of content out there. It's on the 247 Sports channel. It's on the CBS Sports HQ channel. NBA draft both before and after. College recruiting periods both before and after. 247sports.com as well. We've got you covered on all bases.